Hello and welcome back to Everything Boats with Captain Frank Lanier, where we discuss boats and boating, from maintenance and repairs to seamanship and safety, as well as everything in between. This podcast is a companion to my YouTube channel of the same name, so if you like and find it useful, be sure to subscribe and please check out my YouTube channel as well, where you'll find hundreds of informative videos on pretty much every boating topic imaginable. So today's topic is replacing your Cutless bearing. We're going to be talking about what a Cutless bearing is, what it does, tips on replacing them, and what you should expect during the whole process. First of all, it's spelled Cutless, Cutless, not Cutless, Cutless. Let's leave the pirate swords behind while we're talking about this topic. But what exactly is it and what does it do? I'm glad you asked because I'm going to tell you. Cutless bearings are found on inboard powered boats with shafts and propellers. You're not going to have them on stern drives, outboard motors, any of that stuff. These are boats that have an inboard engine. You got a shaft that goes out and exits the hull, and you'll either have a Cutless bearing in what's called the stern tube, or you'll have it in a strut, which supports the shaft after it comes out of the stern tube. And you also may have more than one Cutless bearing. You may have you may have a couple of them or three, depending on the size of the boat and how large it is. A Cutless bearing supports the propeller shaft of your vessel while allowing it to turn freely without damage. Cutless bearings are typically made of naval brass with a fluted or grooved interior rubber lining running the length of the bearing. So if you have a Cutless bearing, looks like a tube, the inside of the Cutless bearing has a rubber lining with grooves running fore and aft of the Cutless bearing from one end to the other. These grooves allow water to come in to both cool the shaft and lubricate it while it rotates within the Cutless bearing. Okay. Problems occur when the ridges of these grooves start to wear down, which both reduces the flow of cooling water surrounding the shaft and it introduces looseness or play in the Cutless bearing itself. The former can lead to overheating and shaft scoring, while the latter, the looseness, can cause anything from excessive vibration to shaft and engine alignment issues. To determine if your Cutless bearing needs replacing, look for signs of wear or rubber deterioration. Every time you haul a boat, you check your Cutless bearing. Grab the prop and give it a good firm shake. A slight shaft movement within the bearing, 1/16 inch or so, is borderline, but if you can produce a visible shaft wiggle or worse, an audible thunk when you're grabbing this thing and shaking it, the bearing is definitely due for replacement. This grab and shake method works well for most small and mid-sized boats, but just keep in mind its effectiveness diminishes with larger vessels due to the size and weight of the shaft. In other words, just because you can't produce movement by shaking a 3-inch, 20-foot shaft, that doesn't mean that the Cutless bearing is okay. For our purposes here, we're going to assume if the Cutless bearing needs to be replaced, the shaft is going to have to be pulled to facilitate the job. Some yards may offer alternatives, such as pressing the bearing out while leaving the shaft in place. However, many have discontinued this option due to potential damages, such as strut damage if done incorrectly. While Cutless bearing replacement varies between boats, here are some general steps and procedures that should help with any bearing replacement. Number one, remove the Cutless bearing set screw. Some boats may not have them, but chances are yours does, although they may be obscured by layers of bottom paint or growth. Step two, using a hacksaw, make a longitudinal cut inside the bearing. One that'll almost, but doesn't quite go through the brass bearing casing. This not quite complete cut allows you to split the bearing prior to removal, but ensures that you don't cut too deep, damaging the inside of the strut or the stern tube, depending on the installation. Apply even pressure when sawing to make sure the cut is level. In other words, you don't want to be cutting, you got your hacksaw, you don't want to be cutting at an angle. You want to keep it level with the Cutless bearing. If the strut has set screws, placing the cut just above or below them will allow you to thread hex bolts into the holes to assist with breaking the bearing free. If your boat doesn't have set screws, cut placement isn't critical. Step three, split the end of the bearing using a cold chisel and a dead blow hammer, taking care not to damage the strut. Once the cut has started to split, insert hex bolts into the set screws and tighten evenly, which will finish splitting the bearing and compress it inward, making removal easier. For installation without set screws, bend the inward cut inward slightly with the chisel. Then continue to split the bearing by driving a wood or fiberglass wedge between the bearing near either side of the cut and the strut. Never use screwdrivers or other metal tools for this, as they could damage the inner surface of the strut. Once the bearing has been collapsed, grasp the bend with a pair of pliers and pull while twisting in the direction of the bend to remove it. Number 4, clean the inside of the strut with a green Scotch pad and soapy water. Use a fine grit emery cloth if needed to smooth burrs from the bearing removal process. Number 5, press the new bearing into place. Do-it-yourselfers can make a simple press by using a length of 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch threaded rod, at least 4 to 6 inches longer than the length of the bearing and the strut combined. 3 nuts and 4 thick heavy-duty washers, at least 1/4 inch or larger in diameter than the strut. When you use this homemade press, place a nut and 2 washers at one end, feed the other end of the rod through the new bearing and strut, and then add the remaining 2 washers and nuts. Use thick washers, otherwise they may cup during use, possibly causing the bearing to flare. Hand tighten the single nut to snug it up the new bearing against the strut, which will make it easier to properly align it prior to compression. It has to be perfectly straight, as damage could occur if you try to press it on or press it into place while it's crooked. Coating the bearing and inside of the strut with bar soap, which unlike grease will wash away once in the water, leaving no residue, will help press the fitting into place. Another trick is freezing the bearing overnight. This causes the metal to contract, and it makes it easier to insert into the strut or your stern tube. On the other hand, using a heat gun to heat up the strut will cause that to expand a little bit and may make installation of the bearing easier. Again, this is something you're going to have to determine while you're in the process of removing and installing the new Cutless bearing. You'll have to see which method works best for you while you're trying to get this thing out and the new one in. Once the bearing is pressed into place and flush with the strut or stern tube, coat the set screws with Loctite and reinstall. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if so, and you want to buy Captain Frank a cup of coffee, please click on the support link in the text description below. All monies received, not spent on coffee, will go towards making even more awesome podcasts for my channel. And as always, thank you for your support.